Welcome to the November 14th meeting of the USD 305 Board of Education. Please stand and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you. We do have an agenda that was presented for the meeting this evening. Is there a motion regarding the agenda? Dr. Bandy.
Where is it? I move we approve the agenda as presented.
Okay, we have a motion. We have a second with Ms. Casso. All in favor, please raise your right hand. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries 7-0. First item on our agenda this evening is recognitions and presentations with Ms. Jennifer Camian.
Good evening. Staff members are nominated by colleagues to receive the You Make a Difference Award for their support of students and the mission of Salina Public Schools. Board of Education members surprise recipients during their workday with a lapel pin and a handwritten note. Tonight we honor Joyce Wilson, kitchen assistant at Opportunity Now. When Joyce is serving a school meal, friendliness and helpfulness are in equal proportion to breakfast or lunch. Her positive attitude and smile will brighten your day, while her kindness supports those going through challenges. Thank you, Joyce, for making a difference at Opportunity Now. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Camian. Next item on our agenda is the consent agenda, which includes the minutes of the October 10th, 2023 regular meeting, the personnel report, the financial reports, which include the October's bill list, the September treasurer's report, September investment report, September journal entries, to approve the encumbrance listings, to Localis in the amount of $378,412.56 for the district's internet protection services, to Kansas Truck Equipment for the purchase of a 14-passenger bus for Heartland Early Education in the amount of $96,453. This is paid through federal funds. To Furhoff Uniforms, Inc. in the amount of $88,681.50 for band uniforms for South High. To Johnson Controls for the fire panel upgrades at Central High in the amount of $23,054.34. To Bucati Companies in the amount of $30,000 for professional consulting services for the district's self-funded insurance programs. Approval of the Heartland vehicle bids to Conklin Cars, Salina, in the amount of $50,440 with a trade-in allowance of $8,800 for a total of $41,640. This is paid through federal funding. Approve a gift from Great Plains Manufacturing for the welding program. To approve the French Club at Central High. To approve Y-Link and Civic Organization at Lakewood Middle School. To appoint Paul Meshing as the Transportation Supervisor. And to approve publication of the Notice of Hearing on amending the 2023-2024 budget. Any discussion regarding the consent agenda? Mr. Grant.
Can we remove the professional services encumbrance listing for discussion?
Okay. Mr. Grant would like to move that down, so we'll move that down to our, we'll remove that from the consent agenda and have it as discussion after. Any other questions or concerns regarding the consent agenda?
I would move to approve the remaining consent agenda items as presented.
Okay, Mr. Grant moves to approve.
Second.
Ms. Zimmerman seconds. All in favor, please raise your right hand. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries 7-0. So we will move now to discussion regarding Bucati Companies and the professional consulting services. There, Ms. Exline, were you going to turn that over to Ms. Wright? Okay.
So we, about 2 months ago, sent out a request for proposals for insurance brokers and consultants to sort of get us started down the road of looking at our benefits package and making sure that we are sort of in a good marketplace with the insurance market on all of our products. This started, you'll recall this summer, when there was discussion with Blue Cross, Blue Shield, and Salina Regional regarding their contract negotiations. And at that time, when we sort of realized, well, what happens if there's no Blue Cross in Salina, we decided that we would start looking overall at our benefits package, just to have someone go out to bid for us and see whether we're competitive or not.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments regarding that? Is there a motion regarding that item? Ms. Zimmerman?
I had one more question. We put out a request for proposals, and did we get any from others, or was this the one we got?
We've received 4 proposals back. We, Lisa Peters, Director of Business, myself, and our Human Resources Manager in charge of benefits, Steve Dorisweiler, did interviews after reviewing. We reviewed the proposals. We selected for interviews. We interviewed companies, and this is the one we ended up selecting.
Thank you. I move that we approve the Bucati Company's professional services agreement as presented.
I think Mr. Grant already moved
Oh,
to that.
did he move it?
Would you like to second his motion? Did I miss that? I thought,
I think he asked it to be removed from
yes,
the,
to be removed. So that's your motion to approve?
yeah.
Okay. We have a motion. Is there a second? Okay, Mr. Grant seconds. All in favor, please raise your right hand. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries 7-0. All right, next item on our agenda is the public forum, and we have not had anyone request to speak to us this evening. So we'll move to the action agenda with Dr. Stevens' first item regarding graduation requirements.
Good evening. Last month, we reviewed the overview of the graduation requirement proposals, and at that time answered several questions. And I guess I don't have a lot to go over again, other than that most of the school districts across the state of Kansas are working towards this. I received some information from colleagues across the state, and many of them are in the process of just reviewing to see what they are going to adjust, and whether there's increases or they're staying the same. But at this point in time, my recommendation is for the board to approve the graduation requirement proposal submitted last month. And I would take any questions if you have any at this time.
I just might point out one thing I noticed as we go through under the career and real world category. We have Eagle Scouts, Gold Scouts, 4-H Kansas Key Awards. One thing that was interesting, we were at the Kansas School Board Association conference this weekend. We got to sit on the state school board was there with a panel, and this particular item came up. And there was a district that said, well, there's only these 2, and we've got people involved in other things. And one of the things that was pointed out by the state board members was those are suggestions. Mm-hmm. And that there's a lot of other things. He said basically if something's submitted, the answer will probably be yes, outside of just those bulleted items. I thought that was something that was interesting.
Yeah, conversation with Jay Scott from Kansas State Department of Education, when I asked for some more details related to these kind of items, because there are some of them that are very vague, the senior exit interview and so forth. And I believe they're putting together a panel here in the next few months to have deeper discussions and to draft specific kinds of rubrics for these areas. And during that process, I think you're going to see more submissions. So what I do want to point out is that although the requirement pieces of the courses that are in here are pretty locked in, That part seems to be very fluid still. And if we do have some adjusting to do on that on the back end, the good news is we have time to do it because it's not tied to a course of study. We're also finding through our data with Zello that our students are submitting different volunteer experiences. We'll have that data too that we can review and give consideration. There's a lot of different activities in Salina that would probably fall into that category. When you think about the community theater involvement, all the different opportunities for the fine arts. So I expect that area to grow. If that is the case, we'll bring those up to the board so you can review them. But I also think the guidance from the state is going to help enlighten us of what will qualify and what will not. And I would also say that with some of the work-based learning experiences that we're starting to encounter and looking at the project-based learning that we're doing in our curriculum side, there's a lot of opportunities that'll be rich with that we can bring in. The intention of it from the meetings that the state has had hasn't been to necessarily be draconian, but to allow students to find what fits in their individual plan of study so that it helps leverage the post-secondary assets instead of it just being a customized, like this is the one thing you have to do. And having said that, I don't want to take away from Eagle Scouts or 4-H. I was in 4-H growing up. There's a lot of great things that come with that. The accessibility of those type of programs has increased quite a bit in the last few years, and I look for that to continue, as well as our civic engagement, some of the programming we're going to start working on with that. So I'm hopeful that the state keeps that definition wide enough that it reaches the needs of our students, but also considers what the state is seeing as activities that students are doing too. And another example of that would be clarification as it relates to activities from the Kansas State High School Activity Association. If a student does debate and forensics, does that count as two, et cetera? So a lot of details still to be worked out in that area.
Ms. Zimmerman?
I move that we approve the graduation requirements as presented.
I second it.
Okay, Ms. Zimmerman moves, Ms. Schamberger seconds. Any further discussion? All in favor, please raise your right hand. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries 7-0.
All right, thank you.
Dr. Stevens. All right. Next item is board team for negotiations and certified personnel with Ms. Wright.
So it's that time of year again where we're beginning to think about this next year of negotiations. I'm here tonight to request you to appoint your negotiations team for the 24-25 school year. We're proposing that team include myself, the Executive Director of Human Resources, Legal Services, our Executive Director of Business, Lisa Peters, and 2 appointed board members.
I'd like to nominate Gabe and Jim for the negotiations team for 24-25.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Cusso. Scott, is that a second? Okay. Mr. Gardner seconds. Are there any other discussion regarding the negotiations team? All in favor, please raise your right hand. Opposed, same sign. That motion carries 7-0.
Jim, I need to ask Deborah if that did it. Do we nominate them, or do we have to move to elect them? Thank you.
Move to the next item, which is the board team for meet and confer with classified staff. Ms. Wright.
Yes. So again, we do sort of a negotiations-like process with our classified staff. It is not subject to the full negotiations, but we call this meet and confer, and we have also a board team that meets with the representatives of the classified staff to discuss terms and conditions of employment. And we're recommending that you also, this team would include myself and Lisa Peters and Steve Dorsweiler, the Manager of Human Resources, as well as 2 board members.
And I would like to nominate those board members of Ann and Bonnie for the 24-25 meet and confer team.
Thank you, Ms. Cusso. Is there a second regarding Ms. Cusso's nomination? Mr. Gardner seconds, I believe. Gabe started it, okay. Any further discussion? All in favor, please raise your right hand. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries 7-0.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next item on our agenda this evening is the interlocal agreement with Smoky Hill Education Service Center. Ms. Exline.
You have in your packet a copy of an updated agreement with Smoky Hill Education Service Center. We were charter members, USD 305 was when Smoky Hill originated, and our dues last year were $15,301. As a member of that consortium, we do get support with administrative services, curriculum services, professional development. We have access to bulk purchasing, early childhood parenting services, library services. There are lots of things that come with our membership with Smoky Hill. And so our recommendation would be that we would continue our membership there. And the adjustments, I had Deborah go through line by line and identify changes from the last agreement there was really no substantive change other than dates, a few wording changes. But our recommendation would be that we go ahead and approve being part of that interlocal agreement.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Exline.
Jim, I just want to toss in, I've been honored to serve as the Smoky Hill Board Representative and Chair of their board for the last 2+ years as well. And I've learned a lot about Smoky Hill and not just what they do for Salina, but they do for all the member districts that are listed therein. And it's a really tremendous value added they provide. And we'll talk about it later during board reports, but they also held last week their annual legislative luncheon, and many of us were there. It's just a tremendous networking opportunity. And there's a lot of things coming up legislatively that I think Smoky Hill can help lead the charge on in a lot of ways. So I just want to put a statement of affirmation in for this.
Thank you, Dr. Bender. Is there a motion regarding this item?
Mr. President, I move we approve the interlocal agreement and membership in the Smoky Hill Education Service Center effective July 1st, 2024 through June 30th, 2029 as presented.
Thank you, Mr. Grant.
Second.
Ms. Zimmerman seconds. Any further discussion? All in favor, please raise your right hand. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries 7-0. Thank you. We'll now move into our discussion agenda with Ms. Rector talking about strategic plan goals.
Good evening. I think I made a faux pas there. Let me go back to it. There you go. Okay. It looks like we've had maybe an update to the system, so let me go ahead and, I should have practiced before I came in here, but I am going to be a learner tonight, and I'm going to face challenges and move forward. So here we go. So I wanted to bring to you the goals that we have updated for the strategic plan. And so we've already talked a little bit in September. We had a work session, and we got the opportunity to look back at our strategic plan goals that focused on the Kansas assessments. And so I just kind of wanted to bring that back to the forefront and bring it into this forum because I really do think that it's something to celebrate. The hard work of our teachers and our students and all the support staff and administration and the parents that help students be successful in schools. And we really are starting to see some great movement within our district. And so this is just a chart that basically outlines our 3 different state assessments. So we have the English Language Arts State Assessment, math state assessment, and science state assessment. And those state assessments are given in grades 3 through 8 and also in grade 10. And so what this chart represents basically is our progress towards our goals. And so when you think about the state assessment, it has different levels of performance. And students performing at a level 1, they are performing within that grade level standard, but they are performing kind of at that kind of introductory lowest level of performance for those grade level standards. And then students that are performing at a 3 and 4 would be performing at that higher level within those standards. And so when we think about that, we would want to decrease our 1s, start to see our students move up those levels, and we'd want to increase our levels 3s and 4s. And so we did set goals last year in regards to decreasing 1s and increasing 3s and 4s, and this is an overall picture of our results. And so as you look at these results, we'll see that it was broken down into the different data sets, and the data sets represent subgroups of students. So basically, we can kind of look at how different groups of students are performing. You'll see that the green, that's a yes, and that means that we were able to we were improved in that area for this year compared to last year, or the 21-22 year compared to the 22-23 year. We saw an increase in 22-23 if it's green. We saw a decrease or a negative aspect if it is in red, the no. And then if you see the yellow, the 0 means that we basically stayed the same. And so as you look at the data here, you'll see that we have a range of green, and our green outnumbers our yellow and our red, which is a good thing. And so let me pull this up so you can see a little bit easier. And so that just shows all the different subgroups and their performance level. And so again, we're looking for green as a positive movement, and a red would mean that we have some areas to grow there, that we did not score as well as we did the year before, and the yellow means that we stayed the same. Questions about this? Just to kind of give you an overall big picture to remind you of what we talked about at the September work session, where I went through a lot of data and a lot of our goals. Okay. So
Is it okay if I add a little context here real quick?
Yes, you may.
So one of the things that we are hearing statewide is that in the media, you're hearing that a level 1 is not at grade level. And I want to talk a little bit about that, because I've been talking to our site council members about this when I've been out with Lisa Peters doing our site council visits. The entire third grade assessment is on third grade content. There is no content testing below grade level, above grade level. So the levels are simply showing mastery of the content at that grade level. So a student scoring at a level 1 has less mastery of grade level content, less ability perhaps to transfer and apply grade level content than a student scoring a 2, 3, or a 4. One of the things that I think is important to understand is the rigor of this particular assessment. When you look at that English language arts assessment, a lot of times people understand what ACT scores. And you might remember back to what you got when you took the ACT, if you took the ACT years ago. I remember my score. So on the ELA, if I am getting a 2 on the ELA, that is equivalent to a 19 ACT score. A benchmark score for college readiness is 20. If I get a 3, it is a 23. And if I get a 4, it's equivalent to a 29. A 29 is really high, okay? On the math side, a 2 is equal to a 19, a 3 is equal to a 24, and a 4 is again equal to a 29. So when you think about the rigor of that assessment, students that are scoring in that even the low 2 range are right kind of where they need to be as far as meeting that benchmark score, thinking about post-secondary readiness, okay? So just so that you have that context as you look at these yeses, we're making progress in the areas that you set as goals based upon what our community said. But I think it's really important to understand the rigor of this assessment as we look at as we look at these scores and realize what it is that we're asking of students when they are taking them in grades 3 through 8, and you said 10. So, okay?
I think another piece of that as well is those levels are not like a standard across the United States.
Correct.
They're set specifically by the state. And I actually saw a chart the other day. Kansas has the rigor set, one of the highest in the United States when it comes to that. Mr. Gardner, did you have something you were going to add?
Why do we not track it too?
Why do we not track it too? Well, actually, our buildings look very closely at each student's level, and so they would be looking at the 2. And really, the reason that we go to the decreased 1s and increased 3s and 4s is when you look at the accountability report that comes out in January, that is how the state identifies the information, or that's how they present it. So our goals that we set really mirror the way that the state basically looks at accountability at each district level. And so we do look at the number of 2s, and when we look at data with our buildings, actually they see what is the percentage of 1s, what is the percentage of 2s, 3s, and 4s, and then they'll look at those individual students and say, okay, this student really was performing at a 2 level, and so what are the things that we need to do to support that student to see if we can then have them perform at a level 3. They look at the 1s as well. What are those missing skills that they can then build on that year for taking the assessment the next year? So we do look at it. We just don't have it as part of our goals. Yes?
So if we did track the 2s and the 2s increased, we wouldn't know necessarily if the 2s increased because they came from the 1s and we're doing better, or if they came from the 3s and we're doing worse. So getting information on 2s doesn't really help you without all the other information around it.
And also, too, we want to make sure that we're kind of honing in and focusing on kind of a way that we can measure. And so by looking at that decrease in 1s, that's something that you can really kind of hold on to in the sense that, you know what, that's really what we want to do. We want to decrease the students at that level 1. And then like Mrs. Exline said, performing at that level 3 and 4 is a really high level performance. And so thinking about how we want to increase our students in that area. And so we do look at it as kind of a combination, because that's how the state looks at it, but individual buildings look at it at each level and are provided data at each level.
I'm glad that the different schools are tracking that. I do somewhat disagree. I believe the 2s need to be measured because they are kids. And it seems to me if you put out of sight, it becomes out of mind, and then you start to lose them. So I don't agree with the state that you should not actually monitor the 2s. The 2 is no different than a 3 because you don't know if it came from a 4 or came from a 2, but you're monitoring the 3, so I would disagree with that.
Okay. And so one of the things that, like I said, we do provide for each building, and we do make sure that each year that our buildings are looking at that data across. So we kind of go a step beyond what the state asks us to do. So I wanted to show you this.
I have a question, just super quick, sorry. So would you consider like a 2 has a good understanding of and maybe a 1 has less understanding, and then 3 and 4 excel? That's kind of what I've thought in the back of my head, so that makes, okay.
Yeah. Yes. Oh, go ahead, Bonnie.
Okay. Well, it looks like our district is improving in the English language and the, what's the other, math, but the science, is there something that we need to do to help this category on?
Well, when you look at the science at elementary, our science classroom, our science instruction actually comes from a teacher that actually serves every student in the building. And so as they're doing that, they're really making sure that they're giving those skills, talking about those science skills, but really the emphasis within the classroom is on that math and that English language arts, because we really do believe that having strong English language arts and mathematical skills really helps you access that science learning. And one of the reasons, and I'm getting ready to talk about the critical thinking rubric that we have, and you'll see on the critical thinking rubric as well that our scores are not as strong as we see within the communication. And so one of the things that we are doing is we're working with our elementary science teachers, and actually we just spent some of our Title IV dollars to be able to support them with some additional resources in the classroom to kind of increase that level of engagement and increase that critical thinking. We continually talk about how do we make sure that we are looking at the level of thinking, the curriculum aspect for that science test. And so that is an area of concern, and we are putting measures into place. Also, that science test does test some very specific skills, and especially once you get to the high school level and middle school level, there is some specific knowledge that's tested with that. And so it's probably a little bit more pinpointed on content knowledge that's specific to that science realm than you would see in the ELA or the math. Mrs. Exline, did you?
Yeah, I would add one other thing that I think that we have done. Last year, and Dr. Stevens, correct me if I'm wrong, we adopted a new middle school science series. And in the past, our middle school series, was it last year? Give me a nod. Okay. So in the past, our middle school science taught earth space 1 year, life science 1 year, and then physical science 1 year. The new series that we bought, we looked at what the research, what series was supported, and the series that we adopted actually combines those three. And so now at the middle school level, our students will have a combination of those three disciplines of science at all three levels, rather than having 1 year of each, which is more that traditional high school or post-secondary model. So that was another shift that we made. We definitely have room to grow in science, and we'll continue talking about how do we get more time on scientific concepts, and are there other adjustments that we need to make?
I just wanted to note real quick, you know my opinion on this. I don't get real hung up on assessments. I understand why we have to do it for keeping the state happy and all that, but standardized test results I'm not too worried about it. But I do want to highlight the chronically absent column on there. We've talked about that before too, and I know we've made a lot of strides there, but clearly kids aren't going to be successful if they aren't in school. So to me, that's the most important thing on there, finding ways to get people in school and help the day itself be productive. I'm more worried about the day-to-day production as opposed to what some given assessment does, but I'll talk with the governor about that someday.
Yes, and with chronically absent, I did bring that data to you in September, and we are seeing great gains in getting our students to school, and that really is that hard effort that's happening at the buildings, because, you know, for students to be able to learn, we need them there each and every day, and being there all day is very important. So our schools are taking a lot of strides on working with parents to make that happen.
We got called out from the stage at the Kansas Association of School Boards meeting this weekend for our efforts there. So thank you to your department and everybody else that's making those strides happen.
And it really is that collective effort from our buildings and from my department, but also just engaging parents and you know, recognizing how important it is for their students to be in school. So we're excited about that recognition, and it's on the hard work of all of our individuals in the buildings.
I was just going to comment, Mr. Gardner, as we look at this, as I recall back, when we were really looking at the progress we wanted to measure, the goal was to move those students from 1s to 2s, 2s to 3 and 4. And I think what we're seeing here is just kind of a quick way to look at that and see that if our 1s, if we have less 1s, so we're decreasing the 1s, and we're increasing the 3s and 4s, that means we're passing it through that too. And gaining, we're showing gains without just focusing on one column specifically. That's my recollection in how that was, the discussion we had at the time, was to really focus on how we lift those students up from 1 into that next level. So if we're decreasing 1s and increasing 3s and 4s, we're making progress.
Thank you for that clarification. And we did have a really nice, robust conversation about data, and that kind of leads to this next item that I wanted to talk to, or it's part of the same item here, is our strategic plan goals utilizing the rubrics. And so in September, when we talked about our data collection, we were introducing a new growth measure for looking at communication, critical thinking, and our social emotional learning. And through that conversation that we had, I was asked to kind of take that back to the team and rethink about those goals and say, okay, how can we make sure that these goals are able to give us something that our teachers and our students can strive for, but also really kind of to focus on what kind of incremental growth do we want to see in our buildings, and also to be respectful of the teachers and the students to say, you know what, moving forward is moving forward, and that's what we need to see. And so we did go back and we looked at our goals. And so what we're looking at, and I'm just going to kind of give a global viewpoint of where we're going with these, is actually we kind of stepped back. We looked at the goals that we had set for the state assessments and so forth. And most of those goals we're looking at a 2 to 4% increase each year. And so that is really what we're bringing forward. And we're bringing forward a recommendation that we will set these goals based upon the baseline data that we got last year, and that we would be looking for a 4% increase each year for the movement that we would want to see to meet that goal. Where we're going to focus this is actually on kind of the highest level of that rubric. And so let me kind of talk through the rubrics just a little bit. Is that a rubric is basically a measuring tool that shows different levels. And so for our rubrics, we had 4 different levels. We had a beginning level, an emerging level, a developing level, and a demonstrating level. And so each one of those is a description of how the students would perform, and we'd see that performance basically increase in its complexity of performing that skill. And so where we have decided, or what I'm bringing forward for you today, is to really focus on that demonstrating side. So looking at students that are demonstrating at the grade level skill, and the teachers would be making the determination here based upon that rubric and the descriptors of that rubric. They'd be looking at the demonstrating level, and that's where we're going to focus our goal. Not that we're not going to look at movement of our beginning, our emerging, our developing, but that we're going to kind of set that goal, that one place that we're focusing is all the way to that demonstrating level. And so for our complex communication rubric, we had a 24% of our students were scoring at that demonstrating level when we looked across our K-12 buildings. And so what we would want to see is a 4% increase for this school year. So we would see that we would go up to 28.1. Then for our students at the critical thinking rubric, and this kind of also shows that, yes, we need to be thinking through kind of what does that critical thinking look like. And so at the communication side, that rubric's really looking at interpretation, communicating information, big ideas, being able to talk to your audience, kind of the skills of communication. When we think about the critical thinking rubric, the areas that they're focused on are explanations and analysis, interpretations, inferences, looking at the quality of the information that's being presented, evaluating, so kind of looking at those critical thinking types of skills. And as you look at our baseline, at the demonstrating level, we only had 6.8% of our students performing at that demonstrating level. And so we would, again, want to see that incremental increase, that focus, and so a 4% increase each year. So kind of projecting out, we would want to see at least 10.8% of our students performing at that demonstrating level. And then we would look at the social emotional skills. And when we look at that rubric's going to focus on self-regulation, autonomy, basically that personal control, growth mindset, personal responsibility. And so students performed at a 38% at the demonstrating level for that social-emotional skills. And we will be then, again, looking at that 4% increase each year. And so we would hope to be at the 42 or above percent this school year. And so the rubrics are, utilized by the teachers, where the state assessment, kind of speaking to your point, Dr. Vandre, the state assessment is that one-shot kind of test that you look at. We're bringing in these growth measures, the rubric growth measures, because teachers are able to look at and work with their students all through the year, and they make the determination of where that student scores. And it's the totality of where that student scores at the end of the school year. And so they're really able to, they know their students, they're able to describe what a student can do at grade level, and they have basically that authority and that autonomy to say, this is where the student is scoring, and is able to give us a different kind of measure than maybe what the state assessment does. Questions about these goals?
I like the fact that we're using a couple of different ways of assessing, so we have an objective assessment and a subjective assessment, not just funneling it in one corner.
And I think this will really give the students, when Dr. Stevens talked about, that some of those things that we need to see as our students graduate, having students talk about these rubrics and being able to monitor from K-12 where they're performing and thinking through how do I improve my skills, I really do think it's going to be beneficial and helps that student kind of identify, here's where I'm strong and here's where I can grow.
So that might be one question. How is that information transferred from teacher to teacher?
That is a process that we are working on, and so we'll really use our student information system to provide that information. Last year was the baseline data, and we learned a lot about collecting this data. Actually, we kind of did all the data collection by hand, and for most of it for the secondary. And so we are going to be moving that to an electronic format to make it easier to monitor, and then really get to that process where those teachers have access to that information each year, and the student as well.
Yeah. Well, I noticed that the critical thinking skills were a little low. What are we, as a district, how are we addressing that?
So actually, the next thing I'm going to be talking about is visible learning. And one of the ways that you address critical thinking is engaging students in conversations about their learning, engaging teachers in conversations about the student learning. And so really that's one of the ways that we are looking at how to improve that critical thinking, but also that communication and also that self-directed learning. Other ways that we're looking at that as we adopt resources in our district, we look at what kind of the quality of the resource and what is it asking our students to do? Is it asking them to think at higher levels? And so we look at it from the resource aspect, and then also our teachers will be utilizing this rubric. It gives them a tool that they've never had before, and so they can also help monitor their students' critical thinking. And making sure that we're getting eyes on text, engaging with the curriculum, and students being able to identify, here are the skills that I need to work on, and here's how I meet those skills. One of the things with visible learning as well is that our teachers are really, we're starting this journey to talk about success criteria, and really going to be thinking about how does success criteria help an individual student know what it is that they need to learn, and then how do they demonstrate that learning. So I think in that aspect, we're going to be able to see critical thinking increase.
One thing that I would like you to discuss and give us direction on. During the work session, we had quite a bit of conversation about the rubrics. We had quite a bit of conversation about the last data set that Shanna showed you. How do you feel about the 4% a year? Does that feel about right? Does it need to be higher than that? We were just trying to give you something to start that conversation from, because the board really needs to set okay, here's where the target is, so that we then can work with staff to move toward that target. So we're certainly open to feedback there.
Dr. Vander?
For my part, you got to set some goal somewhere, and it might be that in a year you're coming back and, hey, 4 wasn't enough. That'd be great, but maybe you come back and it was too much. I just don't think you're going to know until you've done it for a year. So I think it's a reasonable place to start, and we'll see where things go. I know everybody's going to do their best, and we'll see where it comes together.
Yes, I had similar thoughts. The changing 6.8 to 18 in 3 years, is a huge jump. It's like 3 times as many kids demonstrating, whereas going from something small, something larger like 38 up to 50 is not nearly as much increase percentage-wise, but when you have so few kids scoring at a higher level, you do want to move them faster. But I agree that we'll have to see how it comes out this year and see if we're anywhere close to these goals or way beyond them or what.
I would think that with our baseline, a couple things that come to mind. Number one, that's the first year that rubric was applied by teachers. So there may be some movement just in the nature of evaluation over time that makes it look different in that sense. But I think it's something that we need to look at continuously, and hopefully we're blowing those numbers out and we can just keep increasing it at a faster pace than we think, especially with the tools that are in place.
And we will bring this information back. One of the things that we're doing with our professional learning communities that we have at the buildings, Dr. Stevens is going to be, as he goes out and talks to them about IPS, about individual plans of study, he's also talking to them about our rubrics and talking to the secondary teachers there. And then our elementary teachers, we've actually incorporated that self-directed rubric into the report card, where it used to have a different terminology that we use, so that that new terminology and that access to that, it will change the conversation.
One of the things you mentioned as we're trying to get these changes is curriculum and things like that. Mr. Grant, Ms. Exline, and myself were at a training this last week. There was a reading professor there from Pitt State talking about the tenets of teaching reading, the very important parts in curriculum, talked about the letters training. And while we were there, you looked up the new reading adoption that we had from last year. Can you share just a little bit about that and how that fit in perspective with his presentation?
Right, so he recommended that we really look at what the research says about adoptions, that they're text adoptions. There are more and more studies about the effectiveness and the balance of our particular adoption when we chose materials to look at for teachers to actually review. We only chose materials that were high quality. The materials that they actually selected at the elementary level exceeded the standard in all of the areas when it came to the science of reading. So what we selected last year under the leadership of Shanna's department and Trish Bandre and our literacy coaches, our teachers reviewing all those materials, they chose a really high quality resource that provides them the support to be able to deliver science-based instruction. So that was a really positive thing. And what he recommended that we look at is the ed reports, the way that the ed reports had actually ranked the books, and ours was one of the top ranked. So that was good news. I knew that would be the case when I looked it up, but it's always good to see it, in that moment.
It's always more fun to talk about at a board meeting when it's in that report and it's high rated.
So our teachers are working hard to shift their instruction. And in fact, a group of us went yesterday to observe some science of reading happening in a different district. And we had discussions today about the letters training and the way we might move forward to support staff in doing that. So there's a lot of movement happening to try to address these very skills. And I'm really proud of the work that we're doing. We're not where we want to be, but that's why we set goals and put things in place to get better and support teachers in doing that.
Thank you for allowing me to put you on the spot. Okay. Ms. Rector.
Okay. And so the next item that I want to discuss is visible learning. And so actually this is going to become kind of a regular, I'll be up here every month. And so this is going to be a regular part of our board agenda, is the fact that to kind of give you updates on visible learning. And so if you remember last spring, you so graciously allowed us to move forward with working with Visible Learning and bringing in some professional development that involves all of our general education teachers. And we had 2 great days in August where we were able to work with the consultants and get our start building our baseline, our foundation, our knowledge there. And then later on in October, we actually had leadership groups come together from each building. And so those leadership groups went through and kind of talked about in a little bit more depth of what they learned in August. And part of that leadership group was starting to put together basically what they call impact cycles. And those impact cycles are looking at where are we at within our data or kind of what we know about our school and so forth, and where do we want to go. And so an impact cycle is a series of where you collect data and you collect that data over a short amount of time, you look at that data, you make adjustments, and then you go into your next impact cycle. So this was the very first time that we got to kind of bring those visible learning teams together for each building. And so when we think about visible learning, the kind of big umbrella is that we're all getting the same training, but really one of the great things about this is that at the individual building level, they're utilizing their needs assessments, they're understanding their own demographics, where are their skill sets, where are their strengths, where are their concerns, and they're taking that individual building information and then developing their own impact cycle as part of that continuous improvement cycle or that school improvement cycle. So they identified areas in October, and over the next few months, they are then looking at that, gathering data, gathering that evidence, and then they will come back in February with our consultant, look at that data, and then set goals, where they want to move forward, what do they want to put into place, and then they start putting those actions into place and continuing to collect data along the way. So right now, our buildings are collecting that evidence, and most of the buildings actually kind of focused on kind of just this very beginning part is learning and talking about the student learning dispositions. And so from your work this summer with Visible Learning, you were introduced to these 6 different student learning dispositions, and they kind of describe that learning process and what do we want students to think about and how do we want them to describe and act as they are engaging with the curriculum, engaging with the instruction that's happening in the classroom. And so those learning dispositions really do align very nicely with our strategic plan because they're looking at, how do students communicate? How are they thinking critically about their own learning and what they are learning? And then also, do they have the skill sets that they need to tackle really tough, challenges, either in the class academically or, whatever challenges they may face. And so when you look at those 6 learning dispositions, most of our buildings are kind of starting with conversations with the students. And so they're using some kind of tools, and one of the tools is a focus group. So some of our buildings decided to use focus groups, and so they're talking to small representative groups from across their building and asking them questions about what does it mean to be a good learner, to see what is it that the student describes. Is it about compliance, or is it really about the engaging with the learning material and the thinking that goes along with it? And then they may have decided, some of them are doing interviews, and so they're interviewing individual students and kind of getting an array there. Or some of our buildings decided to do what they call video diaries, and so they actually videotape the students and ask them that questions and collect that information, and then as a teacher group, they're sitting down and they're watching those videos and kind of discussing, what are they learning from that, and then they also could do some kind of academic survey if they wanted. So really, it's in the hands of the buildings, and our consultant walked us through what are the best practices with utilizing those different evidence tools, evidence collection tools, and then the buildings determined with their teams, the principals right alongside the teachers, developed with their teams what they wanted to collect. Some of our buildings are also looking maybe at, learning intentions, what the teachers may be asking the students to learn and how they're communicating the learning intentions. So really, it's kind of across the board. And so we're really excited to come back in February and hear what data they've gathered. Then they'll learn some tools. They'll use some tools to analyze that data. And then from there, like I said, then kind of start putting a cycle in place of here's what we're going to do, here's how we're going to monitor it, here's the data we're going to collect. What did that tell us after we did the cycle? How do they go to the next cycle? And so it really aligns with that school improvement process. And so right now, we've had 2 days in August with all staff. We had the day with our groups for their leadership teams, and then in January, we'll have another day with all general ed staff. And so I'll be bringing you some updates kind of each month about where we're at, and so that way you can kind of be part of this journey with us. Any questions?
I might ask, what feedback have you had from staff? This was a big lift with buy-in, obviously, from our board and support in that. What's some of the feedback we're hearing from staff?
One of the things that's a little different with this professional development is that oftentimes we'll have a professional development and they'll go and they'll learn about something and then they go directly into the classroom and they start applying it. Really, this started out in the sense of really thinking about the philosophy of learning, kind of being reflective about the process, understanding what the students think and describe learning. And so I think that for some teachers, they wanted to be told what to do, how to do it, and let me go back to my classroom to do it. And then for some teachers, it really is kind of refreshing in the sense to be able to step back and say, okay, I really need to think about what I do and how it impacts students. And so I think we would probably have, variation across the board. But what we found, though, after we had the groups come together with the leadership groups, we're starting to build the capacity within the buildings to understand kind of the overall process more deeply. And so I'm really excited to see the feedback that we get in January to say, okay, it's now starting to make sense. When we talked to other districts as we were making some decisions on going forward with this, one of the things that they kind of warned us about is that after the first couple of sessions, it feels a little unknown, and that you start seeing, okay, this is a conversation that we talk about it and we come back and we talk about the same thing, but we go a little deeper. We expand what we knew about it and how we apply it. So I would say overall, though, it is positive. We already have lots of anecdotal stories from principals and from classroom teachers of going in and trying the learning intentions and getting really positive feedback from the students. And just today, I was talking to a principal, and he said that he was in a room, and one of the students, they were asking, okay, what is it that you're learning today? And the student was kind of looking around, and one of the kid next to him say, oh, Mrs. So-and-so has it up on the board there. There's our learning attention, and that's what we need to do to be successful. And so in that little 5-minute conversation, that student was able to articulate to someone else what it is that we need to learn, and here's how we measure it. And so I think that we are going to be really excited to see the incremental movement with this. So I think there's a lot of great stories about it, and also being able to think through how do you step back, look at your own practices. And it's not that you're abandoning the practices that you had, it's looking at them with more intention and saying, okay, how do I really get the most impact out of this energy that I'm putting into what I'm doing in my classroom?
Any other questions on this record?
So I'll be excited to talk to you again in December.
All right. Thank you so much. Next item on our agenda is the school board reports and upcoming dates of importance. We will start with you, Ms. Zimmerman.
Thank you. I wanted to start by saying that I happened to be driving down Santa Fe when Cash Hollister was working the crowd of 7th graders during the culture crawl, and it was really fun to see him getting the whole crowd fascinated and participating. I attended the ribbon cutting at the new jail, which I wanted to mention because it has a whole wing for learning and rehabilitation programs, including a classroom where the Salina Adult Education Center will be able to have GED classes. And that's a big improvement over the old jail. I attended the Parks and Rec Advisory Board, and we were looking through the Parks and Rec master plan, which has lots and lots of things in it. I guess that's enough of that. But as a candidate, I was on KSL's morning show, and I met with the NEA Salina, which was really interesting to hear. That was along with Dana and Paul Gebhardt Jr. I attended the Smoky Hill Legislative Forum, and probably somebody will talk more about that. Always interesting with all the legislators from our region, or a lot of them from this region, and a lot of superintendents and a lot of board members and staff. I attended the Building Bridges event at the Stiefel, and I hope we get a lot of connections with local employers through that. Good work by Dr. Stevens. And I attended the KASB, the Kansas Association of School Boards State Convention in Wichita. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Zimmerman. Dr. Bander?
I mentioned earlier the Smoky Hill Ed Service Center. This is one of the months where I've done 2 of their board meetings since we last met. They fell on a Thursday after our Tuesday meeting, and then it was last week. And I would say things are going well there. There's a little bit of kind of turnover at the top. Diane Mann is basically back full-time now. She'd been working towards retirement. Another person had been hired, and that other person decided to resign. So Diane is playing a key role there and keeping things moving along. Ann alluded to the legislative luncheon, which I attended as well. And this is the 3rd year in a row I've gone to that. And I would say this was a really more of a civil conversation. I guess was my train for it. The legislators that were present were just really candid about problems they face in Topeka. Just, it's public information. They questioned some of the data that they receive from Mr. Neuenswander at KASB, for example, and just how to work with that. So they asked superintendents and board members in the room, how can we help get better data? How can we partner together? And I think Chris Malamog and Diane Mann really take that as a challenge. What can they do from the service center point of view to help get better, more useful data in the hands of people like Stephen Howe, who has sat here with us before, and Clark Sanders and other elected officials. So it was a really good substantive discussion, and it has my wheels turning as a community member just in a number of different ways. I also attended my first and now last Salina Adult Education Advisory Board meeting in October, which was, I've talked with Kelly Mowbray a lot, I've been around things a lot, but the things that they brought forth, and Jennifer was there too, probably many times, but this time around there was just a lot of great information shared. Bonnie may have thoughts as well from her seat at that table, but just a lot of great things that Salina is really unique in the way we serve adult education. Was my biggest takeaway across the rest of the state. And I'm likely forgetting something, but that's the key points. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I attended the Parks and Rec Board meeting and the Salina Adult Education Committee Board meeting, and I judged at a debate at the tournament that Central High hosted. And I attended the legislative luncheon, which was a good listening time between the educators and the legislators, and they recognized the need to work together for the students in Kansas. So I learned a lot there. Also attended the Bridges event, and Dr. Stevens, thank you for your organizational skills and putting that all together, and the appetizers were exceptional from the culinary students, and the speaker was motivating, but it was just well put together, and thank you for connecting, building the bridges with the community, and helping that, be put together. I also attended the Kansas Associated School Board Convention for the first time, and there were a lot of good sessions, inspiring speakers. One session was Getting Fierce with Communication, how to learn about skills and protocols to improve communication with students, parents, and colleagues to tackle tough conversations and enhance relationships. And I thought, well, that's really good, because we need to learn how to communicate, and I think we could use this like in every area, in businesses and families and marriages, and I just enjoyed that session. And I went to the dyslexia one with 1 in 5 students have some form of dyslexia, which affects their how they see themselves, their identity. It also affects their future if they don't know how to read or that they think there's something wrong with them. So I'm glad our teachers are being trained in teaching students with, or diagnosing, or those that have dyslexia. So attending the convention helped me hear a number of positive things, opportunities, and solutions happening in our Kansas education. And then this morning, I listened to a state school board meeting, which was kind of amazing. And that helped me gain a wider view of their education system in Kansas and what they're doing there as well. So that's.
Mr. Grant?
I attended the Smoky Hill Legislative Lunch last week and appreciated that conversation and the legislators participating in that. We had a CKCIE Board of Control meeting for October. I don't know that there were any big takeaways from that pertinent to this group. Attended the KASB conference this weekend. Participated in a couple breakout sessions there on employee wellness and staff retention. The research data still shows that the classroom teacher is the biggest predictor of student achievement, and so those were great sessions and conversations, especially as we go into our negotiation season here later this spring. And the KSBRC conference also last week in Wichita. Interesting topics and some good discussion there. So, thanks.
Ms. Casso?
I attended the Smoky Hill monthly meeting, and I was an NEA candidate forum, and I appreciate you hosting that. That was a nice addition to the candidates. I felt like we got to hear from you all a little bit, so thank you. A radio show. I did mock interviews at South High with their medical investigation kiddos, and I attended the KASB conference, and I just wanted to give a little shout out to Superintendent Exline and Jennifer Kamian on their school safety program. You represented us very well. It was very well done. So.
Thank you. Mr. Gardner?
I had the opportunity to give Joyce her You Make a Difference award, and it was really special. All of the kids wanted to be present for her presentation, and I just thought that was just awesome, and how excited they got for her, and how embarrassed she got in receiving it. So that was a big highlight of my week. Also attended the KSB. It's the first time I actually attended a lot of the things on the first day, which I thought was really informative. So the objective is to try to continue to learn more each time I go. So very, very good.
Thank you. One of the things about going last is just about all the things that have gone on have been covered, but still some highlights, I think, coming from them. I have attended a few meetings with Salina Ed Foundation. Real excited about Miss Lindsay being there. I think we're going to see some really neat things, not only for the Ed Foundation, but also some neat supports for USD 305 and how we grow and continue to move forward. I attended the KSBRC training with Superintendent Exline and Mr. Grant, as well as the KASB conference. Some things, it's just really reaffirming when I go to some of these meetings with other board members from around the state, and I hear some of the things that they have internally within their board where they're just not able to work together and be productive for the students and the staff and the community. And I go, we don't have that. We are always continually working forward for the students and the staff. I want to thank you, everyone on our board, for that. And then the highlights of KSB, I think Jennifer and she actually I got to be in on two of her presentations. Such a great representation of USD 305 and with Superintendent Exline. But also the other thing that, our board gets noticed for is education as a board member is important so that we can continue to be productive. And we are continually recognized by KSB as a board who participates in educational opportunities and learning how to work as a board and move forward. The fact that all of our board members were there, with the exception of Dr. Bandre, who had family events planned, making that commitment out of the weekend to go and learn and to see what's going on in the state. And that goes on with the legislative piece, just the growth I've seen there and the partnership of how we can continue to work better and really accomplish good things for students. So those highlights that I've had since the last meeting, and thank you all for that. Superintendent Exline, Superintendent's report.
Okay, just a couple things. We have had 3 presentations at state conferences. You mentioned 2 of those. At CANSPRO, which is the Public Relations Conference, we presented about our enrollment campaign. Jennifer did that in combination with somebody from KSB, and they did a great job. We also, we presented about our school safety, which was well received there. And then at KSB, both of those as well. So it's fun to be able to share the great things that are happening in Salina, and we have a lot moving here. I do have an upcoming coffee chat on Thursday morning. It starts at 7:30. I put an end time at 8 in case we don't have a great turnout. I have a little bit longer if we do have a great turnout. And that really is just a chance for people in the community to engage with me in informal conversation, questions that they have. It may be things that I'll need to get back with them about, but just that kind of back and forth conversation. We will offer additional sessions. We're trying to find the best time to do that. Last year we tried during the school day, we tried right after school, we tried evening. We're going to try an early morning, so just trying to find a great time for community to be able to engage with me and ask questions so that I know what's on their minds. Site Council presentations with Lisa Peters continue. She's actually doing one right now as we speak. We were highlighted, like several of you mentioned, for our work on chronic absenteeism at both the Kansas State Department of Education Conference and at the KSB Conference. And I wanted to give you just a few facts because I think that this is why we were highlighted. Our chronic absenteeism in 21-22 was almost 33% of our students missed 10% or more of the school days. What we know is that if students are chronically absent in kindergarten, the chances of them reading by 3rd grade are greatly decreased, and the chances of them graduating are greatly decreased. So we also know that chronic absenteeism in the first week of school is very predictive of chronic absenteeism throughout the school year. And so our staff has been heavily involved in engaging in conversations with families about the importance of attendance. In 22-23, we had decreased that almost 10%. So that is why, they were seeing that we are doing something different, and it really is the efforts of our support staff, administration, teachers, making sure that we're talking to students about the importance of being in school. I looked at our data, and as of this morning, we are actually 3.5% lower than we were this same day last year. So we're still making progress. Probably it's going to be hard to make another 10% decrease, but we're still pecking away, and we're tracking that on a weekly basis and engaging in conversations. And at this time, every single building has a lower chronic absenteeism rate than they did at the same time last year. Every single attendance center. So that's fabulous. I also want you to know that tomorrow at the Kansas State Board of Education, we are being considered for a $558,000 grant that is a Stronger Connections grant. It is really for social emotional learning. It's something that Shanna and the Educational Programs Department have been working on, but we anticipate that will be approved tomorrow. That will allow us to do some additional things to meet students' needs. And you'll remember that in our needs assessment last spring, that those social emotional barriers are something that are definitely heavy on our teachers' hearts, and so anything that we can do to try to eliminate some of those barriers for students, we want to do. So that's a significant amount of money for us to mobilize some great programming for students.
Thank you, Superintendent Exline. We do have a need for 2 executive sessions this evening. The first one for student matters. About how long do you think we'll need for that?
Let's do 10.
I'm hearing 10. Whoever makes the motion, if you could give us 5 minutes to get there, that'd be great as well.
Mr. President, I move the Board of Education go into executive session at 6:49 for 10 minutes for the purpose of discussing matters relating to actions adversely or favorably affecting a person as a student, because if this matter were discussed in open session, it might evade the privacy of those discussed, and that the Board of Education reconvene into open session at 6:59 in the SEC room.
We have a motion, is there a second? Are you pointing? All in favor, please raise your right hand. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries 7-0. We'll be going into executive session. back from executive session, and we do have a need to go back into executive session. Dr. Bandry.
Mr. President, I move that the Board of Education go into executive session at 7:02. How's that sound?
Okay.
For 15 minutes for the purpose of discussing personnel matters, non-elected personnel and their contractual obligations, because if this matter were discussed in open session, it might invade the privacy of those discussed. At the Board of Education reconvene in open session at 7:17 in the SEC room.
We have a motion. Is there a second? Ms. Zimmerman and Ms. Schamberger, second. All in favor, please raise your right hand. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries 4-0. We'll be moving back into executive session. We are back from executive session, and we do have a motion, Ms. Zimmerman.
I move that the Board